Hi Cougars. George and I are going to read All the Lovely Bad Ones, Chapter 3. When we left Corey and Travis, they were going to bed at night, coming up with ideas to pretend to be ghosts, so that more visitors would want to come to their grandmother's inn. Chapter 3. The next morning, Corey and I found the Jenningses on the patio drinking coffee. I leaned against the trellis, slightly embarrassed, but Corey sat down between them. Without hesitating, she whispered, "Did you see it last night?" "I see what, dear?" Mrs. Jennings nibbled at her croissant, her eyes fixed on my sister. Corey drew a deep breath and somehow managed to look pale. "The ghost." "Ghost?" Croissant in midair, Mrs. Jennings gasped. "You saw a ghost last night?" "Shh," Corey hissed. "Grandmother told me not to tell anyone. She insists it's my imagination, but I swear I saw it." "After the story you told, I knew you were sensitive to the spirit world." Mr. Jennings looked at Corey with awe. "Tell us everything. Don't leave out a single detail." Mrs. Jennings kept her voice so low, I had to move closer to hear her. "Well, something woke me up around 3 a.m., Corey said. "That's the demon's hour, you know. Halfway between dawn and midnight." Yes, Mrs. Jennings patted Corey's hand. "Go on." "Well, I went to my window," Corey said. "At first I didn't see anything, but I heard some sort of low moaning sound." As she spoke, a gust of wind skittered across the table, blowing the paper napkins onto the lawn. Mrs. Jennings shivered. "Then I saw this woman in white," Corey said, flitting about under the trees. For a moment, she looked toward the house, straight at me, and I ducked behind the curtain. When I got the nerve to look again, she was gone." Mrs. Jennings leaned toward Corey. "What did she look like?" "She was wearing a long white dress, and her face was really hideous. White as a skull, with dark circles where her eyes should be." Corey shuddered. "She moaned and groaned and then shrieked, like a banshee or something." "I heard it too," Mrs. Jennings whispered, "but I didn't know what it was." "I'm still shaking." Corey held out her trembling hands as proof. "It was definitely evil. Not sweet like Julie's grandmother. Wicked." "Oh my goodness," Mrs. Jennings stared at my sister. "Oh my dear, how absolutely dreadful." The breeze danced in the flower bed, shaking the blossoms. Wind chimes clinked like someone was laughing. For a moment, I thought I saw something move in the shifting shadows under the trees. Mr. Jennings turned to me. "Did you see it too, Travis?" This was my sister's show, so I shook my head. Corey ran to my room and woke me up. I had never seen her so scared. In fact, she scared me. She's really psychic, you know. Psycho was more like it, but why spoil things with the truth? "Do you think ghosts will walk every night?" Mr. Jennings asked, voice low, practically quivering with excitement. "Ghosts usually do the same thing over and over again," Corey said. "Like they're atoning for something they did or didn't do when they were alive." Mrs. Jennings sighed with envy. "Sometimes I get feelings, sensations, a sort of shiver, but I've never actually seen anything." "Nor have I," Mr. Jennings admitted sadly. "We've gone to so many so-called haunted inns. but we've been disappointed every time. To keep from laughing, Corey avoided looking at me. Get up at 3 a.m. tomorrow and watch those trees. She pointed at the grove trees of oaks. Even in the morning sun, the shadows they cast seemed denser and darker than anywhere else. That is where I saw the ghost. The Jenningses stared at the grove as if they hoped to catch a glimpse of the ghost in broad daylight. We'll be watching, Mrs. Jennings promised. Mr. Jennings set his coffee mug down with a clink and got to his feet. In the meantime, Louise and I have sightseeing plans. And some shopping to do, Mrs. Jennings put in. I want to visit the glass factory near Keachie and browse in a few antique shops on the way. There's a cheese store, too, and an artist studio. We watched them get into their car and drive away. Corey grinned at me. They won't be disappointed. A couple of hours later, we parked our bikes in front of the tourist bait shop on Middlebury's main drag and went inside. We found white and green face makeup, black stuff for Corey's eyes, dark purple lipstick, and a bunch of other junk. Rubber balls that glowed in the dark, plastic spiders and rubber snakes, spray-on cobwebs, a haunted house sound effects CD, a lantern, candles, and flashlights that cast a blue gleam and a blue beam. In a second-hand store, Corey bought a long, white, filmy scarf. By the time we had eaten a couple of slices of pizza and washed them down with bottles of soda, we'd spent about a quarter of our entire summer allowance. And we had a 15-mile ride back to Fox Hill, mostly uphill this time. Balancing our bags and the handles of our on our handlebars, we set off for the inn. We spent the rest of the afternoon at the pool. We'd swim for a while and then lie out in the sun and plan our ghost act, then dive back into the water. We had the place to ourselves. The bike riders had pedaled off to add more muscle to their legs. The Jenningses were still touring the countryside, and Grandmother was sitting on the patio dozing over a novel. Every now and then, Mr. Brewster cruised past on a riding mower, pretty much ruining the peace and quiet. He never looked our way. At dinner, a new guest joined us. Mr. Nelson was short and skinny. He reminded me of a really strict math teacher who gave me a C and ruined my report card in the 6th grade. He sat at a table by himself, reading a science book propped open with a salt shaker. Global warming in our lifetime. Fact or myth? It was clear he had no wish to be sociable. Why make friends when the world is about to end? The Jenningses talked Tracy's ear off with tales of their day of shopping, the lovely lunch they'd eaten, the bargains they found, cheese, barnboard paintings, pure Vermont maple syrup, a rusty child's wagon for the garden back home. While they chattered, the bike riders discussed their ride. 75 miles in 5 hours, a near miss with a logging truck, an eagle sighting, and a flat tire. Tim was making a major effort to stay awake, but Robert looked ready to hop onto his bike and ride another 50 miles before bedtime. After we'd eaten, everyone congregated on the porch again. Mr. Nelson sat at the end of the row of rocking chairs and kept his nose in his book. While Tim dozed, Robert studied his map, obviously planning another grueling ride. The Jenningses darted little looks at Corey and me, probably eager to talk to us alone. When it was too dark to see the map, Robert woke Tim up. Mr. Nelson closed his book. They said goodnight and went to their rooms. A few minutes later, Grandmother excused herself. As soon as she left, the Jenningses parked themselves in rockers next to ours. What a perfect night for a sighting, Mr. Jennings pointed to the full moon rising above the mountains. Bright light, no clouds. If the ghost comes, we'll get a good look at it. I'm not sure you want to see her again, Corey said. She was pretty scary. I plan to sleep like a log, I put in. No ghosts for me. Not us, Mr. Jennings said. We'll be wide awake. A cool breeze swept through across the porch, rocking the empty chairs as it passed. The shadows of the morning glories draped the porch trellis, quivered and shifted, and the wind chimes laughed on the dark lawn. Mrs. Jennings pulled her sweater tighter and stood up. It's getting cold. We're in Vermont, Mr. Jennings said. Giving his wife a little hug, he said good night to us, and the two of them went up to bed. By 2:30, Corey had caked her face with white makeup, hollowed her cheeks with green eyeshadow, circled her eyes with black, and coated her mouth with purple lipstick. The scarf hid her hair. Do I look horrible enough? She asked. If you looked any worse, I would be scared of you. We sneaked out the back door and ran across the lawn. Taking care not to be seen, we darted into the inky blackness of the oak grove. Anchored to the earth with its shadow, the inn was dark. Everyone was asleep, except the Jenningses. And although we couldn't see them, we knew they were peering out their window, waiting to see the ghost. Corey stepped on the moonlight grass, waving her arms, and slowly and dramatically she glided along, sleeves and scarf fluttering. She dipped and swayed, and she moaned and groaned, and then turned to stare at the inn. Stretching both arms, she pointed her fingers, threw back her head, and screamed. Over my head, the leaves on the trees rustled and shook, as if Corey had awakened sleeping squirrels and birds. Something twittered softly, and the bushes swayed. With goosebumps racing across my skin, I watched Corey run toward me. Quick, she hissed. We have to get back to bed before anyone comes looking for us. As she spoke, lights went on in the inn and the carriage house, and someone shouted. Fearing we'd be caught, I ran after Corey. At the back door, she dragged me inside, and we dashed to our rooms. I jumped into bed and burrowed under the covers. Moments later, Grandmother called. Travis, are you awake? I pushed back the blanket and sat up, blinking at her. What? I groaned, trying to sound if I had just woke up from a deep sleep. Huh? I heard a noise. She went to my window and peered out. It sounded like it came from that grove of trees. Didn't hear it, I muttered, and lay back down. Grandmother went to my sister's door. Corey! Asleep, she murmured. Didn't hear. It must have been a screech owl. Grandmother sounded it, as if she was trying to convince herself. I'm sorry I woke you. The door closed and the inn was silent again. I curled up under the covers and tried not to laugh. We'd done it. Ghosts had returned to Fox Hill. After a while, I heard Corey tiptoeing down the hall to the bathroom. She was in there a long time. Before she went back to her room, she stopped to see me. Boy, that stuff is hard to get off. My whole face stings. She touched her cheek and winced. If I hadn't found some old cold cream, I'd still be scrubbing. You were great, I told her. She bounced on the bed and laughed. I think I woke up everybody with that scream. People for miles around you heard, I told her. The cows won't give milk tomorrow. The chickens won't lay eggs, and the corn will wither in their stalks. Black dogs will turn white overnight, Corey laughed. Flowers will drop their petals. Barns will collapse, I shouted. Chimneys will topple. Shh, Corey hushed me. You'll wake grandmother. I clapped my hand over my mouth and tried to stop laughing. Corey hugged herself in delight. I can't wait to hear what everyone says tomorrow.